one of the questions is, are we teaching young people how to understand the value of social capital and build it and have the skills to do so successfully? And that's not something we were focusing on really in schools or university, when actually, arguably, that's maybe one of the more important skills that we need today. Brain-based cognition is what the AI people were trying to replicate. But there are these three other kinds of cognition called the extended mind. So one is embodied cognition, situated cognition, distributed cognition. So embodied cognition is the idea that our brains, we are taking in information and processing it through our body. Your body is taking in signals that your brain isn't processing so fast. And so often, when we have that gut intuition, it's because it's like ahead of where our brains are. And our brain is like, no. And it's like, nope, that's right. Because human beings are wired socially to like think with other people. And so how we kind of learn should be much more social. But in an age of AI, where AI is replicating a lot of brain-based cognition, I talk with schools about this. Like, these are the other three kinds of cognition. Very different experiences that help you develop those three kinds of cognition. It's real world, it's contextualized, it's ambiguous situations, it's working with other people in really meaningful, authentic ways, right? That's how you develop those other kinds of cognition. But that's our comparative advantage because the AIs don't have biological bodies.
Hey there, welcome to the LearnIt Podcast. I'm your host, Dhiraj, and I'm super excited that you're tuning into our podcast today. I love having these conversations. We're so blessed to be around so many cool leaders in education today. And I think that these conversations really put light as to all the awesome work that's going on in this industry. One ask I have for you is if you could just take a moment to hit that subscribe or follow button, it would mean the world to me. It helps us to continue the work that we do it in a meaningful way. But I hope you enjoyed the episode. Thank you. All right. Dr. Ulcca Joshi Hansen, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
I'm super excited. Welcome to Toronto. I know you've been here many times, but
Thank you.
It's colder than ever, so I'm sure you'll have a blast.
Arctic or otherwise, yes.
I know. You've had a very interesting career trajectory. I mean, I usually when I'm sitting in this room, I'm talking to someone who's a head of school or a superintendent or a director of education. So I get a very different perspective on this table oftentimes. And I'm very excited to talk to you because I think I'm going to get something different today. But for those that don't know you, and even out of curiosity for myself, what do I need to know about your earliest context to understand why you do what you do today?
So I have kind of two things on this slide that I sometimes use to introduce myself. One is that I'm a third culture kid. And the second is that I'm a futurist. So a third culture kid is somebody who grows up sort of, usually your parents are raised in one context, you grew up in another, and at some point in your formative years, you live in a third. And I'm a third culture kid multiple times over. So my family's Indian, Tanzanian, but we were displaced in the 1970s because of the African nationalist movements. And then I studied and lived in Russia. I was in Germany. I was in France. I was in Canada. And what's interesting about those places is many of those places and societies were in this period of social and political change. So East Africa in the 1970s, Russia, I was there right after the fall of the Soviet Union. In Germany, I was right there after the reunification of East and West. And so being in places that are in transition in ways that I don't think I fully understood until I was older, I think gave me the sense of this time and space in between what was and what will become. It can be an uncomfortable, kind of challenging place to live. And yet there's a lot that's happening. And I think because I was living there when I was younger, I became kind of comfortable and curious about those moments of transition. And in many ways, that's been a through line of my academic and personal questions. So, and then the futurist lens is really, somebody described it as a futurist is somebody who tries to understand and describe the present as accurately as possible so that we can think better about where we're going. And people are like, how do you become a futurist? Like, usually you figure out that you're the person at the cocktail party that is talking for like 20 minutes and people's eyes are glazing over because you're like talking about these things that just don't feel like they fit into people's world usually. But I think as a futurist, it's kind of an interesting time to be alive and working because we're in this moment of transition and change and possibility. And so in many ways, that's a perspective I bring to my work. And my work in education has always been informed by if this is where we think the world is going, what does education need to be to actually prepare young people in society for that space? So yeah, those are probably two big lenses.
Yeah.
And then I'm a mother.
Yeah.
I will say that too, of two teenage boys. So I have 17-year-old and 19-year-old boys. And so I have not only been like doing I'm a teacher by training. I work in education. And then you parent and you're like, yeah, there's nothing quite so humbling.
Yeah.
Or quite as productive in terms of teaching you what you didn't know.
Yeah. Did you ever think that you'd spend your career like this when you were growing up?
I think there was a time where I thought maybe I'd be a judge or kind of a lawyer. But education, I came to reasonably early. When I lived in Germany and I came back, I started teaching second languages in elementary school. And I was really intrigued by sort of what education was, the brain, what we knew about how young people developed. And I had some teachers who really kind of shifted the course of who I became.
Yeah.
And so I in undergraduate, I started studying to be an educator.
I could see you being a good lawyer too.
Probably.
Should you
Yeah,
have
my
decided
family
to
would
go
tell
that
you
way?
that was
Yeah.
true. I actually am a lawyer. I just am a recovering lawyer. So I went to law school. I'm like, I passed the bar.
Wow.
And I worked for a little while as a lawyer, but I obviously work in education and policy. But I am technically a lawyer.
I love that.
Yeah.
Now, you described yourself as a futurist, which I think is super interesting. What are you most excited about when you think about our future, whether it's with education or in general? What are you most excited about? And what do you feel like people more often than not don't understand about where we're going?
So I'll answer that second part first, which is nobody actually knows where we're going. It's very much going to be the product of the choices we make, which to my mind means it's all the more important that we're intentional about the choices we make. And I think sometimes the narratives that we hear and the things we are told make it seem like the world is moving and we're being dragged along, as opposed to, we control two things in life. We control what we do and how we react when things happen to us. And if we change what we do in either of those two spaces, we make different things possible, right, in the future that's created. So I think that's something we often don't think about, right? That every moment and everything we do in our sphere of control actually is shaping the world that we have. So when I think about what I see as possible, and it's a lot of the work that I do and the speaking that I'm doing these days, is trying to help help people understand that we're at this interesting moment. The Berkana Institute has this model that I like. It's called the two loops model. And it has kind of two circles. So it has a half circle that goes like this and another circle that starts and goes up like this. And the point is progress is cyclical. It's not linear. And all systems and institutions that exist now, big and small, were once new. And they grow and they stabilize, and there are stabilizers in them. And there are people dropping out who've been doing different things. And then inevitably, those systems begin to decline because they're not made for purpose. They're not fit for like the present that we're in. And that moment of transition is really difficult because there's no new system yet.
Yeah.
There are people who've been imagining what could be, but it's this period where we have to hospice and take care of people who are in legacy systems, and we don't quite know what's coming next. And in a moment like that, which I think is where we are, it's really important to be intentional about the conversations we're having about what we want to build, what we want the DNA of new systems to be that really serve human beings and create the systems that we want. And I also think it takes slightly different skills to be a stabilizer than to be a navigator of transitions.
Right.
And so from the perspective of each of us as adults, but then also young people, right, the power of young people is that they've not yet been persuaded out of what they think could be. Right? So young people always ask, but why not? Why couldn't we do that? Why couldn't we do that? And most of the time, adults in schools, we teach them all the reasons why the things that they think could be can't, right? So we're like, it's never been that way.
Yeah.
And I actually think this is a really important moment for us to kind of be with young people as they ask, what is possible and why can't we do something different? Because they are the ones who are going to be building the kind of solutions and the ways of being that are going to be the basis of new institutions.
Yeah.
So for me, there's a lot of possibility in this moment. Like I think a lot of us look around and we say, whether it's, our environment or economic systems or social systems or how we take care of one another or not, right? That it's not really working out as well as we would like. It's working for some people, but it's not working for a lot of people. And so I think in this moment, there's a way to reconsider, is there enough? Is there enough that if we think about it and organize it differently, we could actually, live in a world that looks really different? And I think technology and robotics and AI are all part of making that possible.
Yeah. I mean, how long do you think, and I'm asking a very naive question, but how long does it last? I'm going to ask in the most simplest way, like how long are we in this transition period where we are, before I can see the most exceptional technology and education systems change? Because the way that I'm understanding it is we're going through a transition period. There's things that are changing. There's not everything's perfect, but there's a lot of possibility. And so is this like a decade-long situation? Is it a 2-year situation?
It's not 2 years, I'm pretty sure. So I won't say, I think what I just talked about, this is at a kind of 30,000 foot level. So we're talking about, I think it's going to take decades, right? Not years. It's going to be decades before new institutions emerge. So think about many of the legacy systems we have right now were developed after World War II, sort of, right, this birth of an international order that was kind of in the late 1940s, 50s. And we're now in 2026. So these institutions take a while. And, right, I think at moments like this, and it's interesting because I think the people that I am finding seem like they are feeling most grounded at a moment that feels very uncertain and very kind of volatile, are people who are anchoring in place. So they are in their communities and they are looking around and they are saying, we have a challenge. We have a lot of homeless people. We have kids who don't have food. We have families that don't have housing. We have climate issues. What can I do here in my community? What are practical, pragmatic solutions to problems? How do we bring people together to solve them?
Right.
And I think at a moment like this, that is actually what needs to be happening, is the institutions aren't able to kind of create the solutions. So people in their communities need to be going back and sort of saying, what are the solutions and how do we come together to make them happen? So I'm looking in Minneapolis, for example, at the moment, right, of what's happening. And that, right, those solutions over the next decades become the foundation for new institutions. Institutions should exist to make something happen or make it easier.
Right.
So, but first we have to create the solutions, right? The new solutions, the ways of doing things. So I think when I talk about this transition, this is a decades long kind of process. And we can hold at the same time that every single day we're building, right, the muscles that we need to build the world differently. We're building kind of solutions and ways of thinking and ways of working that kind of help to form it. But yeah, when I talk about this, it's, and when futurists talk about it, this is in decades. It's not years or months.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that what we do every day or every week or every month doesn't matter, because it does.
Right. No, absolutely. I wanna spend some time talking about your perspective on the education system. I mean, I'm sure you're more familiar with the States, because you spend more time there relatively. And you can talk about that if that feels more natural to you. But I still think that there are similarities globally across our education system, across the way. I have only been in education, I'd say, working maybe 5-6 years. So I think I'm still pretty early in that journey and haven't seen as much of a change in terms of, like, I haven't seen what it was like 30 years ago, but I do remember what it was like when I was growing up in school. And I remember it being a little bit different, a little bit more social. I go to schools today and we work with schools today. I think social skills are a little bit harder than they used to be. And so you notice these things, but I want to hear from your perspective, because you've been around much longer than I have, and that sort of, you've been able to see the journey of how our system is doing. But where do you think we are right now? And are we doing justice in terms of bringing up a generation that we can be proud of, that can take on some of these really big challenges? And I know it's a huge question, but I'm curious to hear what your perspective is on where you feel we're at. What's your 2 cents there?
Yeah. So I have a book called The Future is Smart, and in it, one of the arguments and provocations that I give people is that as much as we would like to think that we have done so much and changed education in the last 150 years, the roots of our current education system actually are the same as the roots in the industrial model, the factory model, right? When we said we're going to group kids by age. We're going to put 5-year-olds together, 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds. We're going to teach them the same thing and assess them and move them up. And we're going to dump curriculum in them. And while it doesn't quite look like that anymore, right? A lot of the foundations of how we organize kids, how we've taken knowledge and broken it up into subjects and stuff that we teach in certain years, right? It's not aligned with what we know about human development, about developmental stages and what's important for kids at those ages. It doesn't reflect what we know about how learning happens. And I talk about schools in 3 buckets. So you've got your conventional education, which is your factory model. Most schools are not there. I would say 97% of schools are in this middle bucket that I call whole child innovative reform, which is we recognize the shortcomings of the factory model, but we bolt on solutions. So we bolt on a social and emotional curriculum. We bolt on some projects. We bolt on some family community engagement. Right? We bolt on all these things, but fundamentally, we haven't redesigned or rethought some of the assumptions of the system, whether that's that we sort kids by age or that, things have to be linear in how kids learn and that all kids should be learning the same things. And so the schools that I put in that third bucket, I call human-centered liberatory. And there are 2 pieces to that. The human-centered was a strange term when I started using it. But I do think that since the advent of ChatGPT and sort of the ubiquity of large language models, this question of what does it mean to be human is actually much more relevant to a lot more people. Yeah. So human-centered is we're really designing around what we know about who human beings are, what they need to thrive, what they need to grow, how they learn, etc. And liberatory is because, and this goes back to thinkers like Montessori, Krishnamurti, Rudolf Steiner, who kind of say, in many ways, the purpose of our conventional education system was to prepare young people for the world that exists. So in many ways, you're replicating the society that you have and preparing young people to go into it. When it's liberatory, one of the assumptions is, one, every individual is unique and that part of education is to unfold who they are and allow them to unfold. And that means they're all going to look different because every human being is different. And it's liberatory in the sense that we intentionally are going to allow them to potentially let go of some of the assumptions and the ways that things have been done in the past. Right? Yeah. So we're liberating them into new ways of thinking. And I think, we are still at a moment when the vast majority of what we do in education, and to be clear, this is not about individual educators, it's not about individual boards or leaders. It is the water and it is our overall system is still very much rooted in old assumptions. I think about the purpose of education, who young people are and need to be in their education, and really what it is that they need to thrive. And so, the book came out in 2021. I wrote it in 2020. I would say it's more relevant now than it's ever been. And I think things like large language models and AI are a large part of that.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I agree in many aspects as well. I think that there's, I like the 3 buckets and I like the way that you're thinking about it. A lot of when I reflect back to some of the schools, I think it's a lot of let's throw in, a DEI training, or let's put in this innovation program, or let's do this. But it's sort of, putting plasters on a very large system. It's not necessarily saying, let's reinvent the whole wheel. Let's just, change what the wheel looks like a little bit. So, you've got two sons, 17, 19.
Yeah.
I want to ask you a very fun, random question.
Okay.
Do you think your sons need to go to university?
So one of them is in university, but I had always said to them that actually, no, I don't think they necessarily do. What I want them to do is to have a plan for what they wanted to do afterwards. So our older son decided that he wanted to be, a doctor, and he kind of hit on that path pretty early. I don't know how that happened because I'm not really the typical Indian mom, but whatever, he's going to be a doctor and he hit on that. So university was part of his plan. Our younger one is going to apply, but he wants to do a gap year. I've always kind of felt like he was a kiddo who was going to learn through experiential learning. They went to Montessori when they were younger. They went to an expeditionary learning school in middle school and then transitioned for lots of reasons into pretty kind of large urban high schools in Denver where we live. But I don't think they do. I think, and I And I get, right? Somebody would be like, what if he came back from his gap year and said, I don't want to go to university? If he could give me a compelling reason, and kids today are giving that reason a lot. They're like, it's super expensive. It's not clear that like the skills I'm getting sitting in a classroom and getting a lecture are that important. I think we're seeing, at least in the US, but I think this is true in lots of places, you have a lot of young people coming out of university with degrees, but they're not getting jobs.
Yeah.
And I was just actually last night with a friend of mine who's a professor and a dean at the University of Toronto. And we were just talking about the reality that higher education as a sector right now is in a bit of a crisis mode in the sense of there's a disconnect between what employers, not that I think employers should be the drivers of what education is, but they are saying we need young people who have these skills. And actually, you're giving us students with degrees who don't have these skills, and we're not actually sure that there's a match. And this conversation's been getting louder and louder. So when I say, no, I don't think they need to go to university, if you'd asked me that 15 years ago, I might have given you a different reason.
Yeah.
I think now part of the reason is I'm not quite sure that the structure, this idea that you go to secondary school and then you go to post-secondary, and post-secondary is somehow supposed to give you this degree that is going to be the thing that you need. That's not how the world is working anymore.
Right.
So what I would like to say is that my sons need to get, they need to get enough of an education to have the skills they need for the job that they're going to have. And then they need to be able to be nimble enough when that company lets them go or that job goes away to be able to figure out where to go to learn the next thing for them to do the next job that they need. And that to me is far more important, that they want to understand that and two, have the skills they need to be able to do that than that they go through a particular trajectory. So, and this was something we did. I mean, we talked about with our younger kiddo, and he says he wants to go to university, so he probably will. But yeah, I think the world is changing right now. And what I say when I talk to parents is, it's really hard as a parent because I would say we are probably the first generation of parent for whom it is not true. Usually, if you didn't know what to do, you're like, well, that worked for me, so I'll just do this and my kid will be okay.
Yeah.
The challenge is that the world is changing so fast and the nature of the change and the things that are emerging mean that world is literally crumbling towards our kids. And if you just put them on the path that like we went down, I'm like, that path isn't going to exist. And so we really have to fundamentally rethink. And I don't know about Canada, but I think Canada, already you have colleges where there was more of a technical and career kind of, and then you have universities. So I think here you've preserved some of that optionality in a way that I know in the US we really didn't. We didn't invest in career and technical education in the same way. So hopefully, there's a little bit more capacity to absorb and rethink and reform.
Yeah, I agree. I find it interesting because, when I graduated, the name of your university played a huge role of where you got a job.
Yeah.
Right. And even in fact today, many huge companies, law firms, business consulting firms, they look at where you graduated from, and that probably influences 80% of their decision. And I think that in the next 20 years, that's going to play a much smaller role in most industries. In some industries, it will continue to prevail. Like I think in law, it will still be a big thing. But I think in many industries, especially when I think about the future of these entrepreneurs that are coming up, these companies that are coming up with AI, there's going to be, 5 people companies making $5 billion. It's not going to be, 50, 100,000 people companies. And I remember too, when I was hiring for a role recently, I don't even remember what college or university that person, I could not give a shit.
Yeah.
Because I think that, at this point in time, you need someone who is so nimble, can move quickly, can have that mentality that the focus on where they graduate from is sort of dissipating a little bit. And I think it's interesting. And I think the future generation of employers, of hiring managers, of future CEOs are going to maybe give less of a shit about it.
I mean, I think, I think there's a lot there, but I want to dig into what the degrees were and what the universities provided. So there were a couple of things, right? So they were credentials around a set of core skills, usually kind of not durable, transferable skills, but like particular skills and knowledge associated.
Right.
And the assumption was, okay, if you came out with this degree, you knew it. And the universities that had bigger names, right? Oh, okay, we know that consistency around that is true. So to previous conversation, there's so much that changes in a field. Like I was talking to my friend and she said, yeah, by the time you do a curricular review of something, like that's 4 years and the field has moved on.
Exactly.
But the other thing, and this is a colleague of mine, Julia Freeland Fisher at the Christensen Institute, has been talking for years about social capital. And in many ways, when people think about the Oxfords and the Cambridges and the University of Toronto and the Harvards, right, and the MITs, they are talking about access into social capital and social networks that are very important. And so for that reason, I think some of these universities have staying power because there's a way in which their alumni network, the things that they have are really important. And we know that you are more likely to get a job based on who you know than on if you're not from this like subset of schools where just the name alone carries you along. Absolutely. You're more likely to get a job based on who you know. And so Julia, but then also a lot of the networks of schools that I work with have a big focus that a large part of what they're doing in education, even in secondary education, is helping to build young people's social capital. So that if you're, and the thing I've always said to our sons is, look, my parents were immigrants. They didn't know anybody. Their dad grew up in Kansas, Nebraska, teacher, nurse. They didn't have a lot of social capital. My husband and I, for many reasons, have a lot of social capital. And what I've said to them is the gift we get to give you is that if you say you want to be a doctor and you want to shadow someone, or you want to go into IT, or you think you want to go into social media, within 1 degree of connection, we can connect you with somebody that you can go and do an informational interview or meet. What you do with that connection is your deal, but you don't have to go to X university to be able to meet people who do that. Right. And I think, and Julia and others, I think have been talking about this, that actually one of the best things we can do for young people is ensure that they have a network of people beyond their immediate friends, family, not because our friends and family aren't great, but because your social mobility and your ability to kind of pivot and take new avenues in life is often related to the social capital that you have. And so I think because the world in many ways is more democratized now, right? You run a podcast, you probably reach out to people on LinkedIn. That's how we connected. People have access to people. And so really one of the questions is, are we teaching young people how to understand the value of social capital and build it and have the skills to do so successfully? And that's not something we were focusing on really in schools or university, when actually arguably that's maybe one of the more important skills that we need today.
Social capital, leverage, and information, and knowing a lot of details and things. I remember I was when I moved to Canada 2018, I moved alone. I didn't have any family or any friends. I just moved.
Where'd you move from?
Uganda, yeah. So one-way ticket, 2 suitcases. I was here, and I was always studious. I was like, my parents are paying $100,000 a year. There's no way I'm going to screw it up, right? So I'll pay a lot of attention. I'll do really well. I remember in my second year, I was gunning for an internship in Vancouver. It was a decent internship at like a medium-sized bank, Vancouver-based bank. And I knew I was in the final round of the interview against someone else, and I knew I was smarter than them from a grades perspective. I knew that I probably could do a better job, but I didn't end up getting the role. And I spoke to the person after. I was like, "Oh, congrats, one. Good, I hope you enjoy it. But how do you what did you do that I did not do?" Is what I was trying to get to. And he said, "No, my dad knew the hiring manager."
Yeah.
And I remember I called my dad and I was like, "One, I'm so mad that you have no one that you know in Canada." Well, it's not his fault, but I was just annoyed as a 18, 19-year-old that someone's connection played a much more significant role than someone's ability. And I spoke to my professor. I was very close to my professor because I talked to him a lot. I was a kid who'd go to office hours more than I needed to. And he told me, you just got to do the same. And I remember that day very well, because that was when I started a LinkedIn account. And I just said, if I can outwork all these kids who have parents here who know people, and I can outwork them and spend the next 3 years just building relationships with people, I'll be in a better place, 100%. And I remember I would sit every day, my friends would be like, what the fuck are you doing? Right? You're on LinkedIn, like it's Instagram.
Yeah.
I spend more time on LinkedIn than I do on any other social media website. It's where I do a lot of my, finding people. But, it's one, you can find out in that way. But two, to your point, I think that it's one of the most important things, but it's not even taught to us. It's only realized to someone when they're like at this point where they lose a little bit to someone else that has relationships, or they realize that they're not getting enough because they don't know enough people. Yeah. And it's not about their ability anymore. And I'm curious to know from you, because I spend a lot of time with students, they're very young, they're in grades 9, 10, 11, 12. But I want to ask you, in terms of the skill of getting to know people is a whole different skill to me. The skill of building a relationship, the skill, that's a whole different realm to me. That's not math, science, physics, nothing, right? But I don't think that's being directly taught in schools. And to me, it's one of the most important things. But how do we get kids to, one, understand that, but to also get a little bit outside their shell? Because what I think the pandemic did, it made it so easy to be in your own space and to not have those social interactions. And they're not really practicing by even meeting new people. Yeah. And so I'm curious to hear your perspective on how do we change that narrative a little bit, because it is a very important skill for anyone to find success.
Yeah. And I want to, it's really easy to kind of point to the pandemic, but the reality, and again, in the US, but I think there are kind of social scientists who've been looking at this, but in many countries and places, human beings have used institutions like churches, mosques, social civic organizations. There was the book Bowling Alone that came out in the 80s or 90s. But human beings had ways of weaving together community and sort of the fabric of relationships. And over the last few decades, there has been a decline in many of those institutions. Fewer people go to churches. Fewer people say that they're deeply involved in Rotary or some of these other places where people were in relationship. And so the capacity, our social capacity, was eroding, I think, before COVID. COVID, got it off a cliff. Yeah. But I think that erosion was already happening. Part of it was also happening because we were segregating ourselves in, kind of like-minded communities often, whether it was politically or kind of socioeconomically, et cetera. So I think this question of how do we rebuild social fabric and actually help build people's capacity, it feels like a weird thing. We're going to teach you to understand how to be in relationship with another person. Yeah. But we used to learn that because we were inside of communities and
we didn't know we were learning it.
We didn't know we were learning it, but it was we had multi-generational communities. That's the other piece, right? So younger kids were with older kids in the playground, the neighborhood, the church, and you were learning from your elders, from your parents, from your aunts, your uncles, your peers, et cetera. Right. How to do it. And I think what we didn't notice was the way in which that was eroding. And then we weren't intentionally then bringing it in and kind of teaching it in schools. And then, the US exported this and this went out to a lot of countries, but the kind of league tables and standards and grading of schools led to this narrowing of what we did in school, where it became about the subjects, the content, even the subjects we narrowed. But it was less about recess and free playtime and, really allowing kids at certain developmental ages and stages where they needed to relearn, right, how to be in relationship. We stopped giving time for that to happen. So this is, when I talk about human-centered education, ideally when kids are in primary school, nursery and primary school, you're intentionally helping them to kind of figure out, how do you resolve a conflict when you have a fight on the playground? But some of that happens when they're just outside, hopefully for 2 hours a day on the playground in free play. And then adults kind of intervene and say, okay, let's teach you how to handle this, thing that you need. Or in the classroom, you're able to stop a lesson and say, okay, we're seeing something here. Let's deal with it. When kids get to middle school, developmentally, it's a really important and unique stage where developmentally their family ceases to be their primary place of connection and relationship. And they go, it's my peers, it's other adults. I'm like, middle school's a mess because you're feeling really insecure. You don't know where you fit. Nobody else knows where they fit. And it's a complete disaster. Yeah. Right? That's why nobody loves middle school memories. But that's the time to very intentionally be investing in, take kids out on ropes courses, go take them out on a canoe trip where they have to figure out how to kind of work together, even though they might not have the right genes or they might not, come from the right neighborhood. And then in high school, how do you help young people, to your point, start to say, oh, I'm going to be going out into the world. How do I develop relationships with other adults? How do I learn to ask somebody if they will go out to coffee with me to talk about their job? Right. So I agree with you. I think it's always been a really important thing. I think we have eroded it. And then we will add things like social media and technology, and now things like AI chatbots. There's a group called the Rhythm Project in the States that I think is doing some really interesting work in terms of like how are we human together? And, some of the issues that they are raising are, the idea that friction is an important part of being human. We have to engage with people. And sometimes that means how you see the world and I see the world are really different, but we got to figure out how to move past that into something else.
Right.
And a lot of technologies and social media are making it very easy for us to have frictionless relationships, which means that it's much easier to go into those sorts of relationships with these bots that don't create friction than it is to be with real human beings. So, if I could do one thing, it would be to have it so that every kid could go spend a month every summer at summer camp. A summer camp where there was no technology, no phones, no whatever. And literally it was just you like in a cabin with other kids your age, playing, riding horses, doing lakes, whatever. I think those kinds of youth development programs are such an important place outside of some of the constructs of daily life. Yeah. So that is one thing with our kids. I never got to go to sleepaway camp because immigrant parents don't send their kids to sleep in the dirt in the woods. Yeah. Like we left to come here. Yeah. But I always wanted my kids to go to summer camp, and we found the summer camp, and they started going the year after kindergarten. So reception. And so they were going from the time they were 5 all the way through. And this happened to be a program for boys where they worked through ranks. But the fact that they were at this summer camp for 2 to 4 weeks every summer, no phone, no technology. It was one of those places we didn't get emails, we didn't get calls, like no news was good news.
Probably stress as a parent, yeah.
But, but it was great, actually. It's shocking how easily you get used to it. A lot of judgment from people, though. I'm like, they're having the time of their lives. Yeah. They don't want to come back. But one thing that I've noticed about them is that they actually have high expectations of human relationships with their peers.
Interesting.
Because they know what it is to be in an environment where they hike up to the top of a mountain and just sit there for 3 hours and talk.
Yeah.
And, and are with each other. And to my mind, when we get to the point where we're really worried that people will feel like bots are a replacement for human beings, I think our expectation of human relationships is really, really, really low. And we have to be allowing people to be reminded of what high quality human relationships are, because they are different than relationships with chatbots.
Yeah.
And I think that's something really important, right? And I would love schools to spend more time and take that really seriously, which is here's a time where you have young people with other peers and with adults, and we should be spending a lot of that time helping them to feel what high quality human relationships are like.
Yeah.
So that they expect that.
Yeah. Sometimes I transparently, sometimes I feel bad for the kids, because I remember when I was in school, one of my favorite memories was we went down to a chimpanzee island for 3 days. I didn't sleep for 3 days. I didn't eat for 3 days. Okay. On paper, horrendous experience, but best time of my life. We built a tent. I didn't know how to build a tent. My friends and I built a tent. Forgot about the phone. My mom was stressed. It's fine. Yeah. And didn't sleep all night because we were playing games. And when I think about school, I think about that. I don't remember my A squared B. I remember that, right?
Yeah.
And in some ways, I sort of feel kind of bad, because it's not like it's anyone's fault. So it's not like it's the kid's fault. But, I feel like if they got to experience something so authentic as that, so like you don't have to try, you don't have to think about what everyone's thinking. You just have to have fun. You just have to be yourself. Just talk to people.
Yep.
And you build a little bit of confidence naturally. You don't have to try and do anything like that. And so I'll definitely come to you when I have kids for parenting advice. Because I feel like if I had a kid, I want them to see that, to live that a little bit. I feel social media has sort of put so much access to information. for someone who's 15, 14, 13. It's just too much access to information. Their brain is full of this clogged up information. And for a lot of them, it's really hard to leave it. It is an addiction to me. And I know for a lot of kids, it's like we can't leave our phones.
And it's designed to be, right? And adults too. Let's be really clear. I mean, my children are great at calling us out. They're like,
I call my dad out so much. So he's there on Netflix. And when I used to be in school and watch Netflix, he would shit talk me and be like, get off your laptop. And now I go back home. I was just there for 3 weeks. TV's on all the time. I'm like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Role is switched. But yeah, I agree. Adults, children designed to be, give us the dopamine.
Well, yeah. And I think, going back to this conversation about the society that we want to build, right? One of the constructs of our current world order in many ways is unrestrained capitalism. Some countries have gone further with it than others, but it is unrestrained capitalism as opposed to what I would call social capitalism, which is capital is a good thing, right? Money, resources are a good thing, but they should be in service of something as opposed to we're going to make as much money for our shareholders, even if it means that we are kind of doing things to our younger generation that's unhealthy for them, right?
Yeah.
And so to this question of, well, what actually do we want, right? Is that something we need to reexamine?
Yeah.
So.
And only in Ontario, I think, in the province, I think it was maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago where we banned cell phones from the classroom. But up until then, if a kid wanted to pull out their phone, they could do it.
Yeah.
I could never do that in school. And the sad part is I talk to teachers, they say they can't even tell. Some of them will tell them, put it down. Some of them have told them, and then the kid will go to the parent. The parent will go to the principal will tell the teacher, don't do that.
Yeah.
Right? And I think it's also, to me, I think that the school plays an important role, but so does the parent.
Of course.
The parent to understand that if they're being told to put their phone away, it's good for the kid. It's not, it's not being bad for them. And I think sometimes parents take it too personally. And they tend to have this sort of defensive mode, and then they go to the school, and then it's a trickle effect from there.
Yeah. And I think, this goes to, I'm a fan of Peter Block's work, and there are a lot of people, Bria Parker, others who are talking about community and how we build community. But, for many of these things, we have not invested as much as we could because of lack of time, resources, et cetera, in building the relationships that we need to enable us to have difficult conversations about things where people might have different perspectives, right? And so what's difficult right now is that, schools, leaders, we're trying to say, okay, what can we do in schools? Because we think this is in the best interest of our kids. And we haven't invested in the same way in, hey, parents, you are part of this community and we want you to kind of understand. And again, I don't think this is bad faith on the part of anybody. Parents haven't necessarily kind of thought of school as, hey, this is a place that is a partner in raising my children, right? And schools haven't necessarily been as successful as they want to be in engaging their parents to say, hey, you are part of your kids' learning experiences. And so we're at a moment when actually we needed to have the conversations 2 years ago, but we're still trying to build the right ways to have those conversations. My friend Tuesday, she's a consultant, she says, relationship is the resolution. And we often try to do this initiative or have this talk or have this presentation when actually it's, if you can get people to buy into the idea that we're putting kids in the center and we all have their interests in mind and we have to play our roles and that parents take that seriously, educators take their role, leaders take their role, the rest of the community takes their role, right, in that. And I think, again, when I think about this moment of transition, there's a reweaving of relationships that needs to happen to enable us to get there. And we sort of, I think, we pitted the individual against the collective in many ways. And we've sort of allowed, I don't know, we've just kind of allowed ourselves to see each other much more as adversaries rather than...
We're not playing a team sport.
We have the best interest of a kid in mind.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just, and again, this is not about individual schools or leaders or whatever, right? I mean, I think there has been politicization around certain things, but this is just it's a moment in humanity where we somehow lost our way a little bit and we're going to be figuring out how to come back to it.
Yeah, I understand the parent side and the school side. From your perspective, what does the community, the society need to do to also help raise our kids? Because to your point, it's a combined effort. It's everyone's shared interest in raising our future generation. What does the community and society, for people listening, they aren't parents, they aren't at a school, they just work or live. How can they play a positive role in influencing our future?
So this is where I kind of go back to place, right? Anchoring in place, because these conversations at the theoretical level about what does society have to do, right? It's kind of, you can barely get your head around it because it's just really amorphous. Okay, we moved from Denver, Colorado to Durango, Colorado, smaller town in Colorado. I live in Durango. I think in a town like Durango, and I've been asking my husband if he could do that. I'm like, it would be a fascinating question to say, hey, you've got the head of the university, you've got the head of the bank, you've got the head of the foundation, the head of the chamber, the head of the school, the head of the hospital, and all these kind of civic and business leaders, plus some advocates and social advocates. What if they were actually to say to the community, hey, Durango, right? Where do we want to be as a community 20 years from now, right? We have issues with resources. We have issues with energy, with water. We want our kids to want to feel like they can live here and come back. What would it be for us to sort of set a vision of what that was? And then where would people find their places in it? So like I was having this conversation with somebody. I said, there are a lot of older people who live in Durango who are retired. And the baby boomer generation is retiring now. And they are talking a lot about wanting to feel like they have purpose in their life. They have skills, they have knowledge, they've been successful. We have schools that say we don't have enough adults around because actually if we had more adults, right, on the playground, or we want to engage young people in thinking about future careers, et cetera, where is the link that's being made between a bunch of people who have a lot of expertise and things to contribute, who are about to retire or retiring, and schools that say that they actually need more adult humans that young people, want to spend time with? Who's making the connection to say, what would it look like actually for us to connect young people and sort of these older volunteers that might be there? And there's some fabulous, again, like pockets of things. So there was a school in Florida where I read an example of, there was a lot of fighting, there was a lot of, bullying, et cetera. Bunch of dads took it on themselves to be like, we are going to make sure that there are 3 or 4 of us at the school all day, every day for a month. They were on the playground, they were in the lunchroom, they were in the hallways. Their presence dropped the number of disciplinary instances, fighting, bullying, et cetera, just by having adults there. There was a thing in Zimbabwe actually called Grandmothers on a Bench. I thought this was fabulous. They, these places, these villages didn't have psychologists, sociologists, et cetera. And so they tried to keep the most severe cases for the professionals. And then they took the grandmothers in the villages and they trained them on just basic cognitive behavioral therapy stuff. How do you listen to somebody when they come and talk to you? Turns out grandmas are mostly kind of good at that anyway. At that, yeah. And they put them on bus stops around the villages. And they found it became like a Forrest Gump thing where people would come and sit down and talk to the grandmother for a while, get up, somebody else would come and talk to the grandmother. But they tracked it, and the incidence of like mild depression and kind of loneliness, et cetera, were stemmed by that.
Oh, wow.
So I think these questions, right? Like, hey, the university is trying to get college students opportunities to have real world learning. We have businesses in Durango. We don't have enough chefs. We don't have enough wait staff. How do you actually, make these connections? But you have to get people in the same room to have that conversation. And that same room, I think, is easier to do when you're anchored in a place, whether it's a neighborhood or, a smaller city or whatever. Yeah. My friend Deanna, who's the president of the St. Croix Foundation in the Virgin Islands, she talks about, the island. They literally are an island. And they brought people together to kind of build these relationships. And when the hurricane hit, it was like, okay, well, we have no food, we have no electricity, we have no whatever, but we are an island and we have enough resources. And they brought people together to like do generators, distributed generators. They had people coming together to like grow food and then distribute it to other people. They had places where the kids were coming on a daily basis and people were helping them with their lessons, right? When the school was burned down. And I think this idea of how do we find the islands that we are a part of? How do we find the communities that are a manageable size that we can be a part of and actually begin to sort of like bring those communities together to have conversations? And I think, people are I actually think people are really hungry for that.
Mm.
Right? And so to your question about people listening who don't have kids or they're not educators, you're in a community and there is something you have that is of value to your community. And, it would be interesting to kind of brainstorm, what is that? Is it volunteering for a mentoring program? Is it volunteering to go in and read? Is it volunteering to bring people food who don't have it? And these things, even though they're not directly happening in schools, they are the lessons that our kids are taking away about what matters and what it is to be in community. And when I interview young people, especially in high school, the thing I hear most from them is some version of, we're really tired of everyone telling us to sit down, do our homework, get into university, get a degree, and then we can live our life. They're like, the quality of our life is now. And the quality of our life now matters. And what matters to me is actually developmentally as well as just personally. I want to know who I am. I want to know that I matter. I want to know that I can contribute. And in some ways with mental health, right, I see these big problems in my community. I see institutions declining. People aren't voting, climate change, all that. You always feel much better about something when you feel like you're doing something about it.
Right.
So we talk about youth, hopelessness, purposelessness, depression, anxiety. There's a lot for young people to feel anxious about at the moment. And wouldn't it be amazing if we were like, great, find a problem. Let's give you a chance to think about what you can actually do about it in the realm that you're in, and to do something about it. And by the way, you're going to learn networking. You're going to learn how to talk to people. You're going to learn how to research. You're going to have to learn how to do a project.
Yeah.
Right. Those are the skills you need anyway. And we will help you actually feel like you are empowered and have agency. And we all feel a lot healthier emotionally, psychologically, when we feel like we have control over our lives and aren't just kind of at the mercy of it.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, it's sort of like saying, I always tell my friends, when there are these moments where you'll be so stressed about how much work you have. But if you think about it, when you're actually doing the work, you're never really very stressed about the work you have because you're doing the work. And so it's like the action of doing it itself takes away and relieves a bit of that, because you're not thinking about all the stress. You're thinking about actually execution. Right. So I really like that. All right. Okay. I'm going to shift gears into, I'm going to do a bit of a rapid fire with you.
Okay.
So I'm going to throw you a question. You can feel free to give me a response back in a minute. What is one thing you've changed your mind on about recently, either in life or education?
Pickleball and mahjong.
Okay.
So we moved to Durango and I had to figure out, right, I'm almost 50. And I was like, I need to make new friends. I don't have kids in school. How do I do this? And I have, I don't know that I actively thought about those things, but I was like, that's for other people. But mahjong and pickleball have been two ways to really kind of develop loose. And I think I've been re-persuaded. It's not that I was against it, but I was reminded of the importance of those loose relationships that often we're like, how do I find my best friend in the world? And actually, most of our lives are about the people that we see in the grocery store. I see once or twice a week. We chit chat about something, and that actually a lot of our mental well-being is associated with those.
Yeah, I love pickleball.
Yeah,
nice. Who doesn't, right?
Well, I mean, I don't know if I'm good at it or not, but I'm getting better. And
that's all right. That's the point, is you play it. Yeah, I love it. All right. If you could wave a magic wand and transform one thing about education overnight, what would it be?
Every school would spend the first 3 weeks of every academic year doing things like I am poems, doing lifelines, taking kids out camping to just kind of experience themselves and to kind of build the relationships and sort of reestablish relationships between the adults and the adults, the adults and the kids and the kids, and that we really did that. So that would be one. And then the other is that we would ask every kid the question, what do you do when no one's telling you what to do? So when your life's not overscheduled, give them room to answer that question, because when you ask kids that question, usually they're like, I don't know, because I've never had time to think about it. And then give them regularly scheduled time to actually pursue that interest as part of school and count the learning. And this is where I think AI and other tools can be really helpful, but count the knowledge, skills, mindsets give them a grade for it because they are learning important transferable skills. And right, one of the big conversations right now about AI and cheating, sorry, this isn't rapid fire, but is that, kids are just, they're not willing to engage when things get hard, they give it to AI.
Yeah.
And they short circuit it. Every human being has something that they do because they care about it so much, and they will struggle through hard things, right, to do that thing. And so I think it would be amazing, and it would shift the entire tenor of school if we allowed kids the chance to pursue the things that they cared about enough to kind of like struggle with it. And I think they would get a lot of the things we worry they're not getting right now because of cheating and AI and all the things by doing that. So, but building in time to let it happen.
Yeah.
And giving them credit for it.
Yeah, I like that. I really like that. Nice. Love it. Okay. When you're working, when you're not working, how do you recharge? Like, what brings you joy besides pickleball? Outside of
and Masha.
And Masha, yeah.
I read. Like, I enjoy reading, and for my work, I read lots of like dense things. So I have a couple of like women's historical fiction writers. My husband has joked with me. He's like, you at some point are going to do what a lot of lawyers do, and you are going to write a historical fiction / romance, like all tied together kind of book. I'm like, probably.
Yeah.
So I do a lot of reading. I'm sort of just rediscovering. I've just taken up Japanese jogging. I don't know if you've heard of this.
No,
it's like a very slow jog, and so I'm doing that. Yeah, and I'm trying my hand more at cooking now. Like cooking for fun, not cooking because I have 2 kids at the end of the day that immediately want it, but sort of being like, hey, here's a recipe. Like, I'm going to try this, and just being still and enjoying like the process.
Yeah.
Of, like chopping, cooking, doing that.
Wow. You've also written your own book.
I have written. Yeah.
Future
and I'm
Smart.
working on a second one. Yeah.
How do you, I'm asking very, very honest and just selfish at this point. I want to write a book. And I have a premise of what I know I want it to be about, but how do you, I've never written a book. I don't know anything about writing books. How do you go about it? Like if you'd recommend me today, what should I do tomorrow, the day after, a month from now?
So the first book, The Future of Smart, was actually in my head starting in like 2009, and I didn't write it until 2020. So that tells you something, because I was in a similar state. So I did this course, and I thought she did a couple of interesting things. She said, who is your ideal reader?
Okay.
And first identify who your ideal reader is. You hopefully have a premise of the book, but who's your ideal reader? And really build out that reader. Like, is it a man who's 45 who works at a thing, and like these are the struggles he's having in his life, and this is why my book is relevant to this person, this ideal reader. So then you have a picture in your mind of a person that you are actually writing for. And then there was some other stuff she had us do in terms of like looking at titles and covers and stuff. But the other thing she had us do was take note cards and put a single idea on every note card. So basically your book, all the ideas, just put them down.
Brain dump.
And then use the note cards and start organizing them into like chapters or chunks that go together to help you start to think about like what's the flow of the ideas that you're trying to do, but put individual ideas on note cards so that you can move them around. And then like once you have that helps you create an outline. And then so those are just some initial things.
Still pretty helpful.
And I'm happy to talk to you about it. But then the other thing that I think is so worth it is a developmental editor. So developmental editors, I don't know how their brains work, but it's pretty phenomenal.
Yeah.
And the first draft of The Future of Smart, I sent it to my developmental editor. And he was like, great, we've got the clay. And then we basically like had to go through and like reshape the whole thing.
Yeah.
But like, that's just a way a brain works, and mine doesn't. But I will tell you, I use Claude. I mean, I play, and I've been using AI for 3.5, 4 years. I actually think Claude is really good as like if I prompt it and I'm like, I want you to be a high level senior editor at this publishing house in New York whose specialty is these kinds of books. Here is my here's my outline. Give me like your honest critique of like what we're blah, blah, blah. And I have had Claude come back to me and be like, yeah, no, this is like 4 books in one, and you can't possibly do all these. And then I'm like, okay, so now that you've said, okay, now tell me what you think. And I'm like, it's pretty good like now. So if you can't afford a developmental editor, like ask Claude or some AI to be. I think Claude is best because I find the writing style and the language of it the most consistent with like a real human voice.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think AI can be a really interesting tool.
Probably will for me. Yeah. Well, sorry for the derail.
And I'm like, don't put this in the podcast because then Sam will be like, really? You're using Claude instead of me?
Yeah. No. This is for me personally. Okay. What's something that most people don't know about you?
That I'm a black belt in karate. So I studied martial arts for years in middle, high school, and in college.
No one should mess with you, yeah.
It's funny. So it was Subakdo Taekwondo. So it's like the precursor of Taekwondo. And looking back, because I'm writing the second book now, and it's a more of a memoirish look. But I look back, and there's so much because it's not. They had 8 key concepts. 5 of them were internal and mental, and 3 of them were physical. And I look back on what those key concepts were and the sort of like discipline around them, especially as you get into the higher levels and what it meant. I just think it allowed me, I'm really sort of into embodied knowledge right now. And I think it was this period of my life when I was embodying and integrating into just like literally how my body shows up in the world. These important things that actually have been a through line of a lot of the work that I do, but I don't think I'd ever really made that connection in the last 25 years or so until I was starting to deconstruct and kind of think about it. So yeah, it's just a way of showing up in the world. And she always, my instructor always said, she was like, self-defense, whatever. Yes, it's fine. She's like, but so much of self-defense is how you actually show up in the world.
Yeah.
That if you look like you're a possible victim and you walk around the world like you are a possible victim, you're more likely to actually become a victim.
Yeah.
Which is not to say that, anybody is responsible for what happens to them. But there is something, I think, to that, which is if you walk in the world with a sense of like, whatever, then different things.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, it's true, right? I mean, my aunt is very scared of drowning, and we were once on vacation, and she didn't want to go on the jet ski, and then we convinced her, and that was the only jet ski that fell. And the guy's like, I've done this for 30 years.
it's her,
yeah. And I was like, you're so stressed about something happening, it's probably gonna happen.
Well, I mean, and this is where the neuroscience I think is really interesting. Oh, that's another thing that many people don't know about me. But I tell this story to middle schoolers because I think it's an important story to tell, and to parents. So I had one teacher in middle school. I had her from year 5 to year 8, and she taught us reading and English language arts.
You know what I noticed? You say year, and I also say year. And when I talk to someone here, they say grade.
I do too, but I'm also, because I've lived in lots of places, I use different words. If I'm in the US, I talk about grade.
The first time someone said a year, I'm like, I used to say year 10, year 9, year 8. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's fine. So she said, look, I care that you learn you read good literature. So we read books, lots of books. I want you to learn to write. But she didn't teach us grammar. So we had these projects where we were doing research papers, and I was super, super interested or reading these books by Lois Duncan, who is this author who did a lot with paranormal psychology, ESP, reincarnation, life after death, all these things, witchcraft. And I really wanted to do a research paper on extrasensory perception. And she was like, fine. So this was like in 1991. So there wasn't a lot. No, 1988. So I read my way through the library, did this research paper. And I tell people about this sometimes, and they're like, I can't believe your teacher would let you do something so unrigorous. I think my parents thought that.
Yeah.
But those 2 papers that I did got me super interested in the human brain and everything we know and don't know about it. And so because of that, this was before there were MRIs and all the brain research, but because I'd done those papers, I was like reading and following all the stuff that was emerging in neuroscience and brain scans and what were we learning, which then has a direct through line to the fact that I ended up studying kind of neuroscience. And witchcraft, same thing. I was really interested in witches. Did this whole project. That got me really interested in this period of history in the US and in Europe with the witch burnings and what was happening, et cetera. And there's a lot of my work is about the sociocultural things that were going on around that time that were actually related to the fact that women often, and women who were deemed to be doing things that male, institutions didn't deem okay, were deemed witches. So, but it ended up being a period of history I studied. And so the fact that I had a teacher who let me do something on that was a direct through line. When I finished The Future of Smart, I actually tracked down that teacher. So I hadn't been in touch. I did invite her to my wedding and she came, but I hadn't been in touch with her. And it was a little scary that I was able to track her down to this nursing home. But I sent her a copy of the book with a note. And I was like, your fingerprints are all over this book because the stuff I write about and the ideas that we talked about, there's complete link. And so I kind of say to parents, I'm like, you know, your kid is going to say this. And you're like, well, that's ridiculous. That has no value. You're like, you don't know.
Yeah.
Everything is connected to everything.
Yeah.
And if you let
them
kids,
follow the thread.
Yeah, you have to just trust that it's going to be okay. And I would say that to schools too, right?
Yeah.
Which is why I think ultimately, you know, but then that's about the adults showing up differently. Like, okay, you say you're interested in video games. Fine. So video games, that's your starting point. Yes, you can play video games for a while. Now I want you to think about all the things there are to research. Like, what's the science behind how they design games? What's the ways in which gaming is now being used in medicine to be able to teach people protocols for medication? What is like there are all these questions that start to emerge. So let them start with video games.
Yeah.
Right? Start with, okay, I'm a basketball. I want to be a basketball player. Great. At some point, there's like, they'll get injured. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, what happened? How do tendons repair themselves? Like, what happens if you can't? Like, what do physiotherapists do? Like, what does that mean about the rest of the body? Everything.
Just have that curiosity to ask the questions.
Yeah.
Wow. My teacher would have never let me do that. But anyways.
Well, I mean, I will say I had the last of a generation of teachers who I think became teachers at a time when there weren't a lot of options for women and people of color. And so you had a lot of people going in who I think, you know, I'm so glad they have many other options, but not only were they just really talented people and curious and all that, but also they stayed in the classroom for long enough that I think they understood that kids are different and unique and that their pathways are different. And so, you know, by the time I had Miss Selinger, she'd been teaching for almost 40 years. She'd raised her own 2 kids. And so there's a way in which when that is true, it's why grandparents engage with young children differently than their parents do.
Yeah.
Because you're like, it's okay. Right? Yeah. It's going to be okay.
Yeah.
Because you've been around long enough.
You know.
To kind of like, it's okay, right? Whereas the first time parents were like, oh my God, like what? They're not sleeping.
Yeah.
And so I think that was part of it too. And I think we don't value that enough as we think about our educators and about why we want to support them and keep them and pay them and respect them so that they stay in this profession long enough to become masters of their craft and be able to kind of like do these things for young people that you have to have experience to do it.
Yeah. That's really well said. I mean, when I was talking to my nana, my grandfather, he said that the feeling of when you become a grandparent is very different than the feeling of when you become a parent. And he said, I enjoyed the feeling of being a grandparent more than I did being a parent.
I think that a lot of grandparents say that, which is, you know, I mean, it's different. It's different. It's apples and oranges, right? It's like on the one, it's like your job.
But I would always love to go there because I could get whatever I wanted, you know?
They're like, you'll be fine.
Yeah.
You'll be fine. If he doesn't eat that much dinner tonight, he'll be fine.
Yeah, he'll be all right. He can do whatever he wants. Yeah, he's allowed. Everything's allowed in his household. Wow. I know. I mean, I feel like we could do a whole other podcast where I can just learn about witchcraft and your findings.
I
feel like it's so interesting. I was watching A Beautiful Mind.
Yeah.
And you know, he had schizophrenia, and so I was talking to my friend last night, literally, and I was like, it's so interesting how our brain works. Like, how can that just happen? How can you start hallucinating? And then I went down this Wikipedia thread, and then I found out about how it works. I watched a YouTube video, and I was like, dude, this is crazy. And then his partner started telling me about witches in like Romania and their family. And I'm like, what are you on about? That's not legit. And then she said, no, it's legit. And then we went up to like 1 just talking about witches and stuff. But it's always so interesting because I think it's not evidence, not obvious, but once you go down this rabbit hole, this sort of, you know, you dig deeper, you find so many interesting things.
Well, but I think this is, you know, we didn't talk about this with AI. So first of all, I don't like the term AI because it makes it seem like there's intelligence and not intelligence. And actually intelligence is the ability to solve complex problems. And there was mycelial intelligence and plant intelligence and animal and primate and human. Right. And now there's this thing called non-biological substrate intelligence, which is we recreated neural networks, which we thought was the basis of our intelligence on non-biological matter. that is distinct from human intelligence, and it will never be the same because it is not biological inside of an embodied being that sits in time and space and context, right, in the way that a robot may at some point. And I think what's interesting, the jaggedness of what AI can do, and there is overlap with what humans can do. But really, human beings, like we know like 10%, maybe 50, if I'm generous, 20% of like what our brains are actually capable of.
Yeah.
Because our brains have survived, been about survival in the world to do things, manipulate things, like keep us alive, etc. If we now have non-biological intelligence that can do a lot of that stuff, I think the interesting question is like, what else are human beings capable of that we haven't been putting our time on? And I think this is where like podcasts like the telepathy tapes, I don't know if you've listened to it.
No.
It's all about nonverbal autism, and individuals who have children with nonverbal autism have been saying for decades that they can communicate with their children or the, grown children through telepathy. I mean, a form of telepathy. And so this podcast, I want to say like Kai Dixon, she's in her second or third season, but she interviews some of the individuals who've learned to use boards, et cetera, to communicate. And what they talk about in terms of, they're like, yeah, you all are constricted by words. You're limited in your thinking by words. You're on one frequency because you have to think in, with, and through words. We are on a different frequency where we access, it's like accessing what's out there, but differently. And they talk about the Hill, where they meet other individuals with nonverbal autism. They talk about like just literally absorbing a book, like almost by osmosis. Like it's really interesting.
Yeah, wow.
But you're like, everyone's like, oh, well, that's not real. I'm like, well, our current construct of science would of course say that's not real.
Yeah.
But neither was quantum physics until it is. So it's interesting. And I'm like, yeah, I think there's a lot that we're not aware of.
Yeah.
And education matters because the experiences we give young people shape your brain in one way versus another. Everyone loves neuroscience until you tell them that what they're doing is not necessarily good. Right. So like early literacy and like phonics really early, I'm like, actually, that's not great for the human brain. Like you want them to be play-based, embodied, learning, like not just sitting and like, because it's developing your brain in different ways. And all that.
Yeah.
I'm like, either you believe in the neuroscience or you don't. I mean, or either neuroscience is real or it's not. And if you say it's real, you have to like actually.
Yeah.
Not just when you like it.
Not when it's in your favor. I was also listening to another podcast about like communicating with the dead. And it's very interesting. Your initial instinct was like, this is bullshit. And then you're like, well, let me just try and listen and let me be curious and see. You never know. Right?
You ask any mother or any parent, and they've often had an experience with.
I tell you,
they're like something is wrong.
Yeah, and how do you know, right? Yeah,
but energy is all connected. We're all made of energy. Energy is all connected. It's not that weird to think that actually you can be aware of what's happening with energy that you are connected into for some reason. I'm like, it's not crazy.
It's super interesting though. Wow. Okay.
We're off topic. I think you had a couple of more rapid questions. Sorry.
It's all right. Yeah. No. My rapid fire is never rapid.
Oh, okay.
I call it rapid fire for, the spice of it. But final question on the rapid fire. If you could go back and talk to young Ulcca, what's one thing you wish you'd known then, now that you've spent your whole career doing what you do?
So I think that's a complicated question because I think on balance, like my life has unfolded kind of in a way that's pretty magical, or it's gotten me to the place where I want to be with like detours in between, not all of which I loved all the time, but they were really important. I think maybe just the lesson would be listen to your gut, like make time to actually be still and like listen to the part of yourself that sometimes is telling you to do something even when you're not sure why, whether that is like talk to a stranger on a plane or go take that path because, in a wood when you're taking a hike, or leave your school job when you got the offer to take that job, even though you're not exactly sure whether that's the right thing to do. Or get married at, like marry the guy that you met when you were 22 after college, right? Sort of, but take time to listen to and cultivate that part of yourself that talks to you that isn't this part, and listen.
Yeah.
Or, and don't always second guess. I feel like for the most part, I've listened. I have a mentor of mine who would tell me that he'd been telling me for like a decade, you are not meant to work at a nonprofit for someone else. You are meant to like do your own thing.
Right.
And I kept going into like nonprofit job. I would do like a nonprofit job for 2 or 3 years and then go off and do my own thing for a few years and then be like, oh my God, I've got to go back into a nonprofit job. And I finally in 2024 left a job. I'm like, I am not going to work for anybody else anymore. So it took me a minute to kind of get there. And I'm glad I did great stuff. But yeah.
Yeah. No, it's I think I'm trying to get better at that. And I feel like it's one of those things where when I don't know, it's a weird way to say, but when you see results from trusting your gut, you trust it more. Your gut sort of also builds itself. I feel like you just get the instinct comes more quickly, more naturally, sort of like you're building reps in. But I'm trying to improve on that myself because sometimes I'll say, I'm like, that's bonkers. I shouldn't do that. That's too extreme or too crazy. And oftentimes I think it's because usually what your gut's telling you either is associated with something a little bit more extreme, a little bit more difficult to do sometimes, that it's very hard to actually take action on that because it doesn't seem logical. It just seems instinctual,
Well, this is a whole thing. So like brain-based cognition is what the AI people were trying to replicate. But there are these 3 other kinds of cognition called the extended mind. So one is embodied cognition, situated cognition, distributed cognition. So embodied cognition is the idea that our brains, we are taking in information and processing it through our bodies. So there's fascinating research around some people have a strong sense of interoception, like when your heart rate is increasing or your blood pressure, your breathing, like what's happening. People who have a strong sense of interoception and listen to it, they've done all these things, but there was one with like card decks on this computer game, and like 5 of them were rigged to be good, 4 of them were rigged to be bad. And they hooked people up to these monitors, and the people who had a strong sense of interoception were able to tell the bad decks 4 or 5 turns faster than the people who were trying to think through it. And it's because your bodies is taking in signals that your brain isn't processing so fast. And we know there's a gut biome in the brain. So like our bodies literally are, and so often when we have that gut intuition, it's because it's like ahead of where our brains are. And our brain is like, no. And it's like, nope, that's right. Right.
Yeah.
But we think with and through our bodies. And there's all kinds of like implications for that. It's situated as like, I'm not a laptop. So I think differently in a room like this than if I have natural light or natural shapes or my environment, what I see, it impacts my cognition and thinking. And then distributed is the idea that like it's not group work. It's literally our brains wire differently and sync up differently and work differently when we are with other people, because human beings are wired socially to like think with other people. And so how we kind of learn should be much more social and much more than this idea of like, I just sit here and I learn by myself. It's a ridiculous way to
consume information.
But in an age of AI, where AI is replicating a lot of brain-based cognition, I talk with schools about this. Like these are the other 3 kinds of cognition. Very different experiences that help you develop those 3 kinds of cognition. It's real world, it's contextualized, it's ambiguous situations, it's working with other people in really meaningful, authentic ways, right? That's how you develop those other kinds of cognition. But that's our comparative advantage because the AIs don't have biological bodies. And all the rest of these cognition are about.
And that's going to be more important. Your gut, your instinct, like those things are going to be increasingly important because your brain's not going to be processing as much information.
Oh no, it'll be processing as much. It'll just be different.
A bit different type of information. Process. I could talk to you all day. Anyways, I'm going to shift gears into our final question.
Oh, okay.
So what we do, we have guests leave questions on the show. So I'll
what are some of your favorites?
I have a lot in here that are favorites, but I'm going to ask you one. Maybe I'll ask you 2. I don't know. And then I'll let you also add a question as well. What is one question you wished I had asked you through the podcast that I did not ask you?
You had that, you had the whole thing about like these somatic, these strategies for navigating complexity. So like, what would be the things that like we would focus on for people to actually navigate this moment better?
Tell me.
The top of my list actually is the ability to navigate ambiguity. So I think we need to spend a lot more time with everybody, all of us, becoming much more somatically aware and sort of moving from our heads into our bodies. And that's like through things like body scans, breath work, gratitude practices, like all of these things, because what they do is they still one part of our mind, the part that is the like, must make sense, must categorize, must stay good, bad, whatever, and actually opens us up to the kind of awareness that I think we were talking about earlier, which is you're just aware of what is without labeling it, without making judgments about it. And so then you can just be in what is real as opposed to your interpretation of the thing that you just experienced. And that kind of helps bring you down from your flight or flight mode, which is what I think everyone's in right now.
Yeah.
And I think the capacity to sort of bring ourselves very intentionally back into a place of the world is not all dangerous and everything that is different is not dangerous. I think it allows us to kind of like, that is the foundation of what will allow us to like be differently in our spaces and our spheres of control.
My mom always tells me I should do more meditation.
Oh God, I've been told that since I was like, I can't even tell.
Yeah. And I used to meditate more in university than I do now.
Huh. I'm trying to bring it back. So I did. So this is another thing most people don't know about me, and people like laugh when they hear this. I did, because you've just talked with me for however long we've been talking. I did a 10-day, like a Vipassana meditation retreat, the 10 days.
Yeah. But you don't speak?
Day 0, no, 10 days. No, not only speaking, no reading, no writing, no speaking, no yoga, no exercise, nothing.
Just being.
It's like 12 hours. And I kid you not, like the first 3 days, I like analyzed and deconstructed everything in my life. And I was like, oh my God, my children would be better off without me. My husband's going to leave me. He's going to discover like this was a complete mistake, like all the things. And then day 4 and 5, it was like my brain was completely exhausted and my body was like, my turn. And I literally started falling apart from the inside out. Like I've never been more physically ill than I was like days. And then somewhere around day 7, I think the whole thing, it just kind of collapsed. And I was like,
oh my God.
But it was interesting because it was like I would just have these moments of like, oh.
But good on you to keep going.
Oh, yeah. I mean, of course, I finished all 10 days. But no, it was just, but I joke, but not joke. That shifted everything for me. Like I came home from that, and within 9 months, I had left my nonprofit job. What I've like studied and kind of done a lot of the research and whatever I've done since then was from that, like was after that. And it wasn't so profound. Some people are like, oh my God, like I had this neuroma. It wasn't that. It was that I came back having experienced something that was very different from how I experienced the world after I was back in it. But because I had experienced it in my body, I was just aware of like, but this is not right, or this isn't whatever. And I'm going to try and get myself back because I'd experienced what it was to be in whatever that other thing was.
Wow.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. Well, I'm going to ask you, Ulcca, to leave a question for one of our future guests. So feel free to write out any question that you like.
This second part isn't what you have to ask them on the air, but it's just a reminder. So who is someone who's shaped your life in a profound way? It can be big or small. What did they do? And have you done this for someone else?
Oh, wow.
And then in parentheses, I said, and if you haven't, are you willing to find and thank them or share their impact?
Wow. I really like it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I feel like I could talk to you. I feel like my girlfriend also loves talking to you. I could probably call you home for dinner and we would be talking for hours. But you're a lovely individual, Ulcca. You have a lot of knowledge.
Thank you.
There's a way that you make everyone feel comfortable. I think I feel very comfortable asking you questions and talking to you. Thank you for spending time with us as part of your trip. And
thanks for inviting me.
Yeah.
I'm glad I actually checked LinkedIn and it was
it worked out.
To you.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. Awesome.